Welcome to the second part of my Western pop versus K-pop video series. In the first video, I talked about the difference in the management structure and the debts, how the K-pop idols' debts compare to the debts that are acquired or accumulated, or the debts that the Western pop artists actually get themselves into. In this part, let's talk about the history, how the history of Western pop evolved compared to how South K-pop evolved. So through that, we're going to understand several things. One is the concepts. Concept is a big word in K-pop. Like every group has their own concept. We're going to understand how the concepts are actually different in between Western pop and K-pop. We're going to understand the difference in the training system of Western pop and K-pop, or Western management companies and K-pop companies. And we're also going to understand how the two evolved, how the two grew in comparison to one another. Okay, so Western pop actually has a long and storied history that may be traced back to the Ars Nova period of 1310. So we're going to be here quite a while. Go get food and sustenance. Okay, so I don't want this video to last like 1 week. So let's fast forward to 1925. Many credit the Andrews Sisters to be the very first girl group. They are not the very first girl group, but the most influential girl group probably of all time, because many of their music and their performance style is still very much copied by many performers to this day. However, they aren't what we may consider as a girl group yet, because they are more a vocal group. But we also do need to consider the technology at that time. Remember, there was no TV yet at that time. TV actually didn't start getting mainstream distribution until the 1940s. So there really was no need for a whole lot of performance, because the only time you will see them if you actually go to their shows. Most of the time, people were just listening. Now, many consider the Beatles to be the very first boy band. Now, I don't really buy into that, but they don't dance. That's one thing. And also their history doesn't seem to support what a boy band is as we know today. However, there are two reasons that convince people they are a boy band. One is that when their manager, Brian Epstein, discovered them, he packaged them for performance. So he made them wear suits, and he also had them cut their hair in the bowl cut that is very popular for the Beatles. And the other thing is the fan base. The fan base is largely female, girls actually. So because of those two things, they consider the Beatles to be a boy band. Personally, I consider the Temptations to be the first boy band, because they're actually known for their performance. They're also a very good vocal group, but they are known to be great performers. Now, let's remember that when you watch their old performance, it's not gonna look much. But remember, this is like the 1950s. Those moves that you see them perform now is actually hard hitting by their standards in the 1950s. So they were at the time already signed they were formed in the mid 50s, so way before the launch of the Beatles, but they were signed in Motown. At the same time, the Primes, which is a girl group, was also signed in Motown. They later became the Supremes. Another great contribution of the Beatles is the use of music videos to promote their records, starting in the mid-60s. In 1964, they filmed A Hard Day's Night, and particularly its performance of the song Can't Buy Me Love. Later on, MTV actually honored the director of the music video, Richard Lester, for practically inventing music videos. Now, around this time, Michael Jackson and his brothers were being trained by their father into performing, so he would join them into different singing contests. But in 1965, he was able to have them sign under Motown by Berry Gordy. It was actually after they signed that Motown worked on their public image. Jackson 5 established many musical conventions that other boy bands actually eventually followed. That included close harmonies from soul music and catchy pop hooks. The group also incorporated very involved choreographies in all of their performance. And also, all of the band members sang. So instead of just having one lead singer and then the others would just play their instruments, Jackson 5 would actually, all of the members actually were able to sing. On the other side of Los Angeles, while this was happening, was a company called Charlatan Productions. They took what the Beatles started, and that is creating music videos, and created a model for it. So they would interpret individual songs by crafting original scripts and artistic scenarios to match. However, many of their customers or clients were actually rock bands. As music videos started becoming an art form, Jackson 5 started changing. So they experienced success, but eventually certain members left, new members joined. And so from becoming Jackson 5, they evolved to become just the Jacksons. Now, Bobby Brown took that cue and formed New Edition. New Edition is an American R&B group from Boston, Massachusetts, formed in 1978. Now, by 1980s, they started gaining mainstream popularity. They are often credited for starting the boy band craze, even though the actual term boy band didn't exist until the 1990s. By 1981, MTV launched their cable channel, but their biggest push was given by Michael Jackson when he created the Thriller music video. It was the very first music video inducted into the National Film Registry. Now, during that time, Isuman was actually already in California. He was studying in the University of California, Northridge. He got so inspired by what was happening. He realized that there is a real market there, the same market that MTV is targeting. Now, according to MTV, they were targeting the 12 to 35-year-old market. But based on their own research, they learned that their primary audience is 12 to 24. And this market would watch anywhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours a day. So they were just watching music videos all day. So by 1985, Lee Soo-man actually went back to South Korea with a very, very clear vision on what K-pop should be. He signed, his very first artist is actually Yoon Jin-young, and he is the very first mainstream or pop rapper in South Korea. But it was actually So Bang-chan that may be considered the very first boy band in Korea. They debuted in 1987, and they were the first to introduce b-boying and choreography in their music. Now remember that if you watch their performance now, it's not gonna look much, but at that time that was already hard-hitting. That was b-boying, that was acrobatic and stuff. They became so popular during that time, and they're often credited to changing K-pop forever. Another thing to note is the South Korea and North Korean ceasefire. So remember, the Korean War was going on at that time, and by 1950s they actually signed a ceasefire but not a peace treaty. So they were so devastated by the war that much of the 50s and 60s and 70s were spent trying to recover economically, socially, politically. So it is natural for the entertainment industry to come later than the Western entertainment industry. By this time, Maurice Starr, he was the one who helped Bobby Brown with New Edition, started forming a new boy band, which was New Kid on the Block. Unlike the conventional audition system, he started just calling people they know. So if he felt that somebody fit into the group, he would bring them in. It was actually only the last member that they decided to audition because they were missing the Michael Jackson of New Kids. So that ended up being Joey McIntyre. Maurice Starr actually found him via an audition. In the early 90s, they were a flop. They were almost kicked out by Columbia, which was the record label that signed them, until the 11th hour when a DJ actually decided to play their song, and then he just started getting a lot of requests from the audience. So by 1991, New Kids started becoming extremely popular in the mainstream market. They were selling out stadiums, they started releasing merchandise. Everything was going good until they were hit by a lip syncing allegation by a former producer. So the producer accused them of lip syncing during performances, and that Maurice Starr, which was the producer, was actually contributing. He was singing in the recording. So New Kids actually interrupted their tour, went back home, cleared everything out, and said that it is true that there is a backing vocal, what we now know as MR, or music recording. So they said that they would sing over it. So there is a backing vocal, but they would sing over it. So they were still singing live, and that they admitted that Maurice Starr was singing the backing vocals, support vocals in some of their albums. After that, they went on their career. Everything was going fine, but the critics started looking down on them. They started calling boy bands fake, blah blah blah. When Crystal Jones got an idea to form a girl group that would be a little bit more hip-hop, R&B, tomboyish, she called for an audition, and two of the members, the final lineup, actually answered that call, and they later on named their group TLC. Now, when they finally got a manager, the manager said that the two that answered the audition, they had the potential, but she did not like Jones. So it was odd that the founding member, the one who came up with the idea, was actually booted out. Now, when they booted out Jones, the final member, Watkin, joined, and that's what became TLC, and they eventually became the most successful girl group of all time. Now, on the other side of the world, Lee Soo-man started developing an in-house system that looked after all aspects of an artist's career. His approach was targeted at teenage market as well, the same as MTV, but he wanted to be more in control of all the other aspects. So remember, in the Western market, in the Western industry, there would usually be one person that would form the group, and then that person would market the group to get signed in a different label. And then they would partner with somebody else for merchandising and for production of the concerts and stuff like that. But Lee Soo-man actually wanted to take over all of those stuff. While Lee Soo-man was establishing his system, TAJI and the boys launched. They debuted, and by 1993, they experienced mainstream success. So a lot of people said it is actually their use of rhythm and melodies plus modern production technique, the combination of both, that made the group unique. The other thing is styling. So they really put a lot of effort into dressing themselves into something more modern and more Western. So they further b-boying, and they glamorized the music industry, basically. Now, by 1993, Lou Pearlman caught wind of the success of NKOTB, and he decided he wanted to get into the boy band business, formed his own first boy band, which was Backstreet Boys. He also came up with the boot camp concept, which is similar to the training system of Lee Soo-man, but Lee Soo-man's training system is a bit more holistic, because Lou Pearlman's boot camp just concentrated on singing and performance. Lee Soo-man is more holistic, so it wasn't just the performance and it wasn't just singing. It involved photography, how you present yourself in the public, public speaking, personality development, all of those things. SM also controlled every facet of the artist's career. So they operated as a record label, talent agency, music production company, event management company, concert production company, and a publishing house. So as I've mentioned, in the West, when Lou Pearlman, for example, when he was forming his group, even after forming them, he needed to look for a record label, he needed to look for a merchandising partner, he needed to look for a production company for the concerts. But Lee Soo-man wanted to take over all of that. Now, when Backstreet Boys started becoming successful, Pearlman decided he was going to copy the formula, and he created another boy band, which became NSYNC. In the meantime, SM debuted HOT. In the same year, Yang Yan-sok also formed YG Entertainment, and he operated the same way SM was operating. So he also wanted to get into every aspect of an artist's career. YG's first artist is the hip-hop group Kpop, but it was a flop, and so they decided to just concentrate on the hip-hop duo Junishan. And they also debuted one time, and both acts became very, very successful. In the meantime, farther west, which is in England, Spice Girls actually debuted. They were also formed via an audition. They were also trained the same way Backstreet Boys was trained and NSYNC was trained. However, instead of competing with TLC, for example, Spice Girls decided they were going to compete with other boy bands. So they were basically the female version of a boy band. They wanted to get into the 12 to 24-year-old market, and they were going to do that by packaging the members to be girly, preppy, happy, or chirpy. So you have your baby Spice, you have your posh Spice, sporty Spice, scary Spice. Ginger Spice, I think, is the other one. If there is anybody who we may consider to be the competition of TLC, it would be Destiny's Child. They were formed by the father of Beyonce. And then later on, so they went through different member changes, but later on, right around 1996, they were actually signed by Columbia Records. Meanwhile, other boy bands, the boy band craze was still happening. So other boy bands were still getting formed, launching their own career. The UK boy bands actually invaded the US, you know, so Westlife actually became very big in the US as well. But a major development happened in the 90s, late 90s, and that was when NSYNC and Backstreet Boys actually sued Lou Pearlman. Eventually, NSYNC managed to break away from Lou Pearlman. They decided to sign their own record deal, manage themselves, and Backstreet Boys just settled out of court. Now back to South Korea, YG debuted Seven. He was their first solo performer. He was actually sent to the US to try and get his career going in the West, but it didn't gain momentum. However, SM decided to just push through with their boy band plan and launched DBSK. HOT at the time, they were on their way down. They decided to launch DBSK. They became very, very popular. They became the biggest boy band at that time. In fact, they set the record for the most number of members of paid membership in their fan club. So eventually that was overtaken by BTS. But at that time, they were so big. And then 2 years after, they launched Super Junior. Now, what's interesting is that they follow the same fate as that of Lou Pearlman, Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC. By 2008, 3 of the members of DBSK sued SM Entertainment for being overworked and underpaid. Now, 3 of the members eventually left. They established their own agency, they continued with their career, and 2 other members stayed with SM and they continued to perform as DBSK. Now, NSYNC at that time decided to take a temporary hiatus. So after leaving Lou Pearlman, launching their own album, which became their most successful yet, they decided they were going to take their hiatus. But that was the beginning of the end of the boy band craze in the West, in the US. After that, there were other boy bands that were launched. You can go argue that One Direction, the Jonas Brothers, they were all successful boy bands, but really no one else was as successful as Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. However, in South Korea, things were just starting. So at that time, DBSK and BoA's success in Japan actually started the Hallyu wave. The training system, concept system, the networking, they were all evolving and they were creating better opportunities for K-pop artists. Even the court intervened. So after the case that the 3 members of DBSK filed against SM Entertainment, the court said that entertainment companies can no longer force their artists to sign a 15-year contract. So 7 years is actually the limit of contracts. By 2006, Big Bang debuted. A year after that, Girls' Generation debuted. And a year after that, Wonder Girls debuted. And a year after that, 2PM debuted. By 2011, EXO debuted. And the intention was to actually invade other countries, including China and not just Korea and Japan. Now, the next big development happened when Bang Si-hyuk left JYP Entertainment and formed his own company, Big Hit Entertainment. So, aside from doing the usual training system of singing, dancing, stage presence, personality development, to all of that, Bang Si-hyuk decided that he was going to introduce a more holistic approach to training their artists. So he decided he wasn't just going to train them in all the entertainment related field, but he was also going to train them in different arts. He was going to expose their artists to different genres so that they themselves can decide what kind of music they want to pursue. He educated them and exposed them to the effects of the use of social media and how to use it. And it's not just for their popularity, but also included like this personal, social, physiological, sociological effect of what you do in social media. By 2013, BTS became the first child of that training system. So whether or not K-pop is headed towards the same direction as Western pop, that remains to be seen. We don't know yet. We just know that at some point, of course, the market is going to change. It's going to evolve just because that's the nature of art, that's the nature of business, that's the nature of humanity. Now, I do think that there are certain major takeaways in this history. One is that the training system has always been there. But I do think that the training system of Korea is more holistic in nature, because you're not just teaching them to be performers or singers, you're also teaching them how to actually create a brand out of your own image, which is very important as you run a business. I also think that it's also important to note the concept of concepts. So, that's a big word in K-pop. Like every group has their own concept, but that also happened in the Western pop industry. Backstreet Boys was a bit more man in their appeal. They're darker in their clothes and stuff. But when he created NSYNC, he wanted something that would be different from that. So he created something more boyish and bright. And then you have other groups that came out of that, which was sexier, So the concept has always been there. It's no different from the concepts of K-pop groups. I do think that the one thing that K-pop is doing better than Western pop is the evolution. I think for Western pop, Lou Pearlman was so caught up in the success of BSB, Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC that he just wanted to copy those two groups and expected the same result. He did not evolve. He did not take into account the fact that the market is going to evolve, music is going to evolve, times will change. K-pop managed to keep on evolving, keep on changing. So I do think that K-pop has a better staying power over Western pop. And we can see that with BTS. BTS is transcending music. They're getting involved. They're getting into literature. They're getting into social issues. They're introducing the concept of they have a full narrative for all of their songs. They have their own universe. In terms of in the literature world, they have their own music, and that's their own universe, and that's intricately connected to their music. So that is a sign on how the K-pop industry is sort of advancing its genre. So I do think it has a better staying power. I also think that the future of K-pop is just going to be unrecognizable to us. Like this generation, when we become really older, we look at K-pop and we're just not gonna recognize how it's gonna look like. It's going to be so different from the K-pop that we know today. Now, but at the end of the day, it's still going to depend on the creators and the producers and the artists in K-pop industry. But it would be interesting to watch. In the next episode, let's talk marketing. What is the difference? Let's talk about the difference in marketing a Western boy band and a K-pop boy band.